Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. This is episode number 32. I'm Ramon Mejia. I bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course, author interviews. This week, we want to begin our show course with thanking our great Patreon supporters. We have two new supporters. We have Kieran Uchi and Sebastian Nielsen, both of whom have pledged $6 a month to support the podcast. Thank you very much, guys. They get all our content a little bit earlier than anyone else, but they also get a bunch of other nice, cool, geeky rewards for the level of which you're supporting us, which is the Geek King level. So thanks, guys. You are Geek Kings in my heart. Thank you both for being great supporters. And of course, anyone else who wants to support the podcast on Patreon can go to patreon.com/GeekBytesPodcast. Now, in new releases and reviews, we'll be talking about three great, amazing stories. Actually, four great, amazing stories. We're going with the beginning, Dark Paladin, Book 1. And then we're going to also be reading Legends of Tarthirious, Book 2 of Kylia's story. And then also questing a LitRPG novella. And of course, we're going to be finishing up with Benvari Mountains, Book 2 in the Emerilia series. So those are the novels that I'll be reviewing this week. There were a couple other ones that came out on Amazon that I just couldn't quite get the time to read through before the recording of the podcast here, but I'll be definitely reading them this weekend and reviewing them next weekend. We are going to move on to, of course, LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with our first story. Scotty Fuchs, author of the Origin ARS series and some other ones, has said he's planning some new releases for this month and next month in his LitRPG stories. This month he plans on releasing Galacticon Fist of Legend Volume 2. Additionally, he has going to be releasing next month Earth Tactics Advanced Volume 1. But before that, he does plan to release an unnamed project that is going to be using turn-based gaming mechanics. He's a little bit frustrated with it apparently because it's a complicated way to tell a game story. But I'm hoping that it's super interesting because of that. So good luck to you, Scotty, and look forward to reading your new stories. Also in LitRPG news this week, we have Dakota Kraut. He has gotten the artwork for his second book, Dungeon Madness, and it looks a little creepy. I think it has something to do with the weird growing things on the hand in the picture, but it's cool. It reflects the madness part on Dungeon Madness, definitely. But I'm looking forward to reading it next week when it comes out. And the author, Dakota Kraut, has assured me that the novel is totally done. He was just waiting on the artwork to come in to actually publish it, but it'll be out schedule next week. So there you go. Also, in new artwork that's come out, Lion's Quest Dual Wield. That's the second book from Michael Scott Earl. There's cover artwork for that out. So it looks very pretty and interesting and buff. The guy looks buff. The cover guy. The author has said that the book is up for pre-order now. It'll be out on March 27th for $7.49. That's the pre-order release date, but the author has stated that that's just a date he put out there just to make sure he didn't miss anything on Amazon. He actually plans to release it either at the end of February or the very beginning of March. So look forward to that one when it comes out as well. Now again, there are also two new releases on Amazon this week that I didn't get a chance to read. Just busy week. We have Potty Mouth by Robert Bevan. This is a really short story. I believe it's like 26 pages on Amazon. And it's a short story in Robert Bevan's Caverns and Creatures story series world. So that's the Critical Failure series of stories. That's the same author. He also releases a series of short stories from there. It's really interesting looking. I haven't read it yet, of course, but I like the other short stories he has, and they're relatively inexpensive, and they're nice little pops of interesting story. So I look forward to reading that one. Additionally, Eden's Gate, The Reborn, a LitRPG adventure, is also out now. It has some really nice reviews on Amazon. Again, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, so it's something that I'll be doing this weekend and reviewing next week. Okay, on to upcoming LitRPG. On February 15th, 2017, we have Dungeon Madness, Book 2 of the Divine Dungeon series. Reading Gate Online is coming out February the 17th. That's going to be Book 2 entitled Crimson Alliance. We also have for the Guild, which is the third book in the Emerilia series. I know, book 2 just came out. Book 3 is coming out later, on February the 21st of this month. So, yeah, that's fast writing. Spitznauts, a permadeath lit RPG, lit FPS series. It'll be out February the 28th. Galactic Fist of Legend Volume 2, sometime in February. The Crystal Sphere is going to be out on March the 10th. We also have Lion's Quest Dual Wield. March 27th is the pre-order date, so that's what I'm going to work with. Should be out sooner. Awaken Online Precipice, out March 31st. That's book 2 in the Awaken Online series. Delvers LLC, Obligations Incurred, tentatively out in March. Earth Tactics Advance, Volume 1, again, out tentatively in March. And there you go. That's it for February and March. On to new releases and reviews. Hey everybody, this is Ramon Mejia from LitRPG Podcast, interrupting the regular news stuff. I totally forgot to mention when I was recording the original broadcast about the interview I did as a question and answer interview with Kylia, translated by Nikita Samlin. Now, this is a written interview that was sent by Facebook, email, and a bunch of other ways across the globe for you folks at home. Kylia's Realm of Archon series, book 4, is coming out apparently within the next month on March the 17th. It'll be entitled Shadows of the Great Forest. Now, he answers some great questions about where his series came from, why he started writing LitRPG, his process as an author, of course, and all the questions, and I mean all the questions that the audience submitted. You guys at home asked him, he answered. We also got some cool artwork from Russia for this series that has never been seen outside Russian borders before. It's actually kind of cool, CGI-looking stuff. Check it out, of course, at our website at geekmindspodcast.com. While the link in the show notes for the written interview we did with Kylia, of course. Now, we also wanted to mention that his friend and fellow Russian LitRPG author, Andrei Vassiliev, I hope I'm saying that right, he has written like 10 or 11 LitRPG novels in Russia, and his first one has been translated into English and is being published on Amazon on February the 14th, so not that long from now. It's the Fey Rule series. It'll be entitled More Than a Game. So keep an eye out for that on Amazon on February the 14th. I know you might be busy, kissing a loved one or two, but this seems like a new series from potentially a good Russian author. More Than a Game, out on February the 14th again. So back to your regularly scheduled LitRPG podcast. And in new releases and reviews, folks, we'll begin with The Beginning, Dark Paladin, Book 1. This is written by Vasily Mahenko. You might remember that author from the Way of the Shaman series, which is still being translated and produced here. It's actually a finished series in Russia, and the author is just taking the time to translate it and publish it in the United States. But this is actually his new series that he just wrote in Russian and has done pretty well. It is 385 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unloaded. Now, full disclosure, Magic Jump Books, the folks that do the translating and publishing for those books into English, sent me an early copy of the novel. I've, of course, since picked up the story on Kindle Unlimited, so I'm paying to read it just like you guys. Now, this is a rather interesting and sometimes confusing beginning of the story. It's a little confusing. It tries to explain a lot of stuff at once instead of focusing on the gaming lit RPG stuff. However, personally, once I got past that beginning and just ignored the confusing relationship between the game world and the real world, it was interesting. It was a really interesting novel. Again, this is by the same author with a shaman, but don't expect it to be that same story or even that same kind of theme. This is a much darker story. There's a lot more intrigue and betrayal and player versus player action in this particular series. It definitely has a Hunger Games vibe with newly initiated players teaming up and then betraying each other to survive the academy that the player is sent to. Now, this is the confusing premise of the novel. Our world, Earth, is really a staging ground for a fantasy game. We're all NPCs. And one day, one of us, a soldier, kills a player in the game. And even though that NPC soldier dies, he's brought to life, having earned a place as a player in the game itself. Now, if that weren't confusing enough, the non-player character soldier turned player chooses the class of Paladin and has to survive a mandatory period of training at the academy, which he's supposed to be taught game mechanics, how the world works, all these fundamental things. Now, unfortunately, the player he killed as a soldier is also a mentor at the academy, and he sent his students after our main character to end his life in the game. And because our main character did not go through some weird initiation process, if he dies in the game after losing all his levels, he dies forever. So that's kind of the stakes for him. Now, one of the things I really liked about the game, the novel, I should say, is learning about the game world. To leave the academy, players must find 10 trainers scattered throughout the vast training area, and they must also, of course, survive all the challenges, monsters, other players to get to them all. Now, each trainer is meant to teach the players a different aspect of the game, whether it's combat class abilities, the user interface, special abilities, specializations within classes, whatever it is. And that was kind of a new and interesting way for me to learn about the game world itself. To me, that was one of the most interesting parts of the story. And a lot of the suspense in the story comes from the main character trying to find ways to reach these trainers, even though they're often guarded by other players trying to kill him and the other Paladins. Now, another aspect of the story that I really enjoyed are just the class specializations and jobs. Now, the game mechanics works out this way that each player gets to choose an upfront class, like Paladin, Mage, Hunter. Those are the broader categories. But then underneath that, they can also specialize in what they choose to do, whether it's being an explorer or something else. There are a lot of options explained, or being like a bounty hunter. Specializations. And then in addition to that, they can also choose jobs like a judge or a carpenter or a crater of some kind. So just combining those aspects of the game really allows for a lot of interesting combinations. It reminded me of the job class system from Final Fantasy, which is something that I really liked in that particular video game franchise. And I liked learning about this game mechanic. So it's kind of cool to read about all those different possibilities and permutations possible in this particular game world. Now, again, the story is very much darker than Way of the Shaman. There's a lot of action. There's tons of betrayal. So don't trust anybody in the story when you read it. And there are a few unbelievable plot twists in the story as well. But overall, it's an interesting story if you think of it as a player trying to get through a training scenario of an MMO with player versus player enabled. If you think of it that way, it makes a lot more sense and it's enjoyable. It's a good book. I enjoyed it. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. So there you go. On to our next book, Legends of Tarthirious, Book 2 of Kylia's story. Now, this is actually also being released as a collection between Book 1 and Book 2. These are shorter stories, so putting them together kind of makes sense for the author. This is 165 pages. It is 99 cents, available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, it's really well priced for the page count, in my opinion. The beginning is a little bit awkward because it tries to transition from the end of Book 1 into Book 2, and then it jumps in the gap. Now, in Book 1, it is a story of a dystopian kind of future in England where the government has been taken over by a private game company, and they've actually revoked everyone's citizenship. And people must pay back the national debt or their portion of it to regain their citizenship by a certain period of time. And if they don't, then they're just kicked out of the country. And for our main character, Kylia, her deadline is coming to a close. Not only does she have to pay back her own personal debt, but she also pays back her family's debt, all of whom are dead. So she has a mom, a father, and a brother who all have died, and she's for some reason taken on their debt to pay back as well. It's a weird premise, but that's what we're working with. Now, to do this, people log into the game, the fancy MMO, which is a fantasy world, and they earn money there, and that money can go towards their debt as well. So that's kind of the premise of the world. And in the first book, we got an introduction to that world and some of the play styles for the game character Kylia. Now, in this particular second edition, second book in the series, which is also so short, I'm kind of breaking up the short story into two particular portions of it. One is the real world, the consequences of Kylia's arrest, Kylie's arrest rather, and release on charges of cheating in the game and the public opinion and almost chaos that results from this, because she was getting really close to paying off her debt, and then she was arrested and that money was taken away. So the public learned about this and they're kind of rebelling a little bit against the system as a whole. And that's part of the real world story. Now, the second portion of this is the game world story. And in the first book, it was really just kind of an introduction to the world explanation. In this one, it feels like the character just goes on a series of random, unrelated quests to gain experience in gold. And I'll talk about it in a second, but it feels less satisfying than it did in the first book. Now, the real world stuff is very dystopian, gets a little political sometimes. And it's fine. It's a really well-written portion of it, but it's not super interesting to me. The game stuff just feels unrelated to not even the other quests, but also to the real world stuff. It kind of just felt like it was inserted in there as a series of short stories to make it LitRPG. Like I felt like the real world stuff was at least consistent and coherent. Like that, even though it's broken up by sections of the character in the game world, the real world stuff could actually be separated as its own story and it's cohesive. The game world stuff, not as much. They're just a series of like smaller quests, and sometimes they're really funny and interesting quests, and sometimes they're not. But they just feel like separate little modules that are just put in there. And for me, that didn't seem real fulfilling. And so like I said, it's well written. I like the game characters. I like the characters in the story. The story between Kylie and Gerald the romance there is super adorable. It's interesting. I still like it. It's just that the disconnect between the world and the game world is just feels like two different stories that were kind of smushed together, and only one of which I was actually interested in. So while I like the first novel in the series, and I'll probably read the third one still when it comes out, this second one just didn't really do much for me, so I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Okay, next, Questing, a LitRPG novella written by Kieran Uchi. This is 118 pages, $2.99, also on Kindle Unlimited. I actually think that page count is a little bit smaller than what it actually is, but that's what Amazon says, so that's what I'm going to work with. So it's a little higher price than the last story. It comes out to about almost 3 cents per page, which is a little bit more than I usually want to pay. But again, if you have Kindle Unlimited, go check it out. It's not going to cost you anything extra. This is the story of Anan and his first couple quests in the most advanced full immersion VR game possible. The entirety of the story almost is in the game world. So there's very little real world stuff or storyline, which is fine by me. I prefer it that way. It's a very interesting story. It's more traditional fantasy. The beginning of the story it's just an introduction part where the main character goes on a few intro quests, and that's all it really is. Almost the entire story is just him questing, going from quest to quest to quest, and the storyline just is interesting. I liked it a lot more than I thought it was, just based on the page count. Like it feels like a bigger story than 118 pages, to be honest with you. And while the second half of the book is a little more traditional fantasy, like there are fewer gaming mechanics described there, it was still interesting. Main character goes through starting towns, training in the big city on a variety of quests dealing with smelly trolls, cute vampires, ghosts, and it was a good time reading it. And while I had some issues with the game mechanics, like they didn't quite make sense, like why would a level 1 character hit consistently for 55 to 80 points of damage, and he becomes a little OP, a little overpowered very quickly in the story, despite those little nagging little things. It was good. I really enjoyed it. I give it a 7 out of 10, but I definitely recommend it more for people who have Kindle Unlimited, just because of the price point, purchasing it separately. So there you go. But it was a good story. I enjoyed it. Okay, on to the last review. It's going to be Benvari Mountains, Book 2 in the Emerilia series by Michael Chatfield. Now, this is 366 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, just a quick heads up, the last 10% of this novel is actually a glossary of characters' names, and boy, are you going to need it. one of the few complaints I kind of have about the story, and it's really small, is that there are just so many characters to keep track of. Oftentimes when I was reading the story, a character's name would come in, they start talking, and I'd be like, who is that again? I don't remember who that is, and I had to go look them up, or it would take me a little while to remember who they are. And then that was something that also happened in the last book, and I assume it's going to be a model for this series, when that you have such a large cast of characters and such a big world. That's going to kind of happen. So, but hey, problem solved. There's the glossary that reminds you who these people are at the end of the book. Now, in book 1 of the series, it focuses on the main character establishing a home for himself, Dave, and in the game world, and expands into a community of elves, dwarves, and eventually players. There's a big reveal that, our world is actually the simulation, and that this game world is actually reality, where created by an alien civilization who had planned to use humanity as like soldiers to kill alien races like orcs or whatever. That's honestly less important. Then it's just a good fantasy action adventure story. And the big event in the first book, of course, is the big raid on the Dark Citadel. Now in book 2, Journey to Benvari Mountains, it's a much smaller group going off on a journey to the Benvari Mountains, where Dave is going to learn how to be a master dwarven smith. They have some adventures along the way, which I won't spoil for you guys. During the first half of the book and in the last half of the book, it really is mostly crafting. Dave's story, the other characters learning new abilities, skills, powering up, leveling, that kind of stuff. And that's it. It's not complicated. It's journey first half, crafting and leveling and skill building second half. And it was fun. It doesn't claim to be a super epic adventure yet. This is really a setup for the third book, in which is going to be like an invasion where larger, more complex and scary monsters are being released slowly, and the adventurers have to deal with them in this world. I mean, I enjoyed this book immensely. It was really, if you like crafting, this is definitely something you're going to want to read and be interested in. Again, less action, but more crafting. So there are balancing. It was fun. One of the things that I found interesting about the author is his writing pace. He just released book 1 a couple weeks ago. He has this one coming out now, and book 3 coming out in another couple of weeks at the end of February. And then from the messages I got from him, he plans to release a new book every single month at about the same page count of about at least 100,000 words, or 366 pages at minimum. So that is an amazing writing pace. So I envy Michael Chatfield that at least. But this is a good book. Definitely give it a 8 out of 10. Enjoyable for me at least. And that's it. We're done. That's it for the podcast, folks. Thank you very much for listening, for watching, and for taking the time to listen and to talk to me. You hear me talk about LitRPG and the books that I enjoy. Again, if you want to support the podcast, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. And again, until we can hang out again and chat about LitRPG, folks, remember, go read some LitRPG.